All right, we're wrapping up this week. This is part 3 of a 3-part series on systems and systems thinking. We got pretty heavy and deep, and just about how the systems we create and the unexpected, very negative outcomes that come out of the systems that we have created for ourselves. And so we've talked a little bit about the issue of the thinking that then creates the system. We're talking today about the never-ending growth that's required in a capitalistic structure and the problems with that. And the last thing we're going to talk about is the lack of a do no harm clause for business leaders. So Kim, take it away.
Yeah, well, so interestingly, we've been talking a lot about, how businesses are set up, and that then by definition, the outcomes then end up being, profitability, as we talked about the other day, which has unintended consequences that can harm both people, our mental health, our physical health, it can harm society as a whole. And you look at some of the democracy issues that have been coming up, but also obviously the environment, right? Where we see companies are able to kind of extract natural resources, exploit humans, create massive profits for very few, and then create massive amounts of waste, which doesn't really make sense, but it does in the context of the structures that we currently have around business. So so today the second thing around the business is really looking at this idea of business is set up for perpetual growth. It's rewarded for this never-ending growth.
Conversely, if you don't grow in the business context, you die. You see listed companies who miss their quarterly profit target by a couple of cents, and it's a big sell-off. So it's never-ending growth, and it's perpetual growth. And if you think about growth in the natural world, nothing grows in the natural world like a company has to grow to continually create shareholder value. There's a few examples though in the natural world. One's are weeds. Weeds grow and take over an environment, and the other in our human body is cancer. And cancer is a mechanism that just it grows out of control, and then it kills the body.
And because businesses are designed and rewarded for this growth, then you end up creating artificial components, right? So you're creating an artificial demand, whether you need it or not. So we're convincing people that they need these products or services when they may not. Equally, you end up kind of having products that aren't designed to last because, if I only buy one, that's not a very good business model, is it? Compared to if I have to buy one every day. So you end up really kind of creating, again, doing harm to people on the planet, because of the way business is set to reward.
Yeah. So it's fascinating. Product design ideas, like let's create a product that is designed to fall apart quickly, so you have to constantly buy more of it. That's a brilliant idea for a company and a terrible idea for the planet. So that's the second bit. And then the third bit.
It's just this idea of do no harm, right? So it sounds so straightforward, and originally companies were set up to do, have some function in society. They were there to serve society in some positive way. Well, of course, that's not the case anymore. They're there to simply create profit for their shareholders, which is a relatively small group of people. And they are allowed to do a heck of a lot of harm on every front. And if you kind of think back, different, people used to have child labor, and we said, regulation was put in place to say that's not okay. We used to have ridiculous exploitation around workers for the work hours. We said that's not okay. We still see it, of course, that it's, people are being exploited all over the world today. We still have slave labor. We still have, unfair wages and unsafe working conditions. Every corner of the planet has it still. So we can see that business isn't going to self-regulate because, again, they're not rewarded to self-regulate unless consumers jump in and say, we demand this. We're not going to buy from you unless you pay your workers fair wages. But the pressure on consumers is really tricky because those companies are cheap. Those products are cheap. They're affordable.
Think about fast fashion, for example. Fast fashion is an extraordinary example where back in the old days it was 4 seasons, I suppose. You have a summer range and a winter range, and now you have weekly.
I was going to say, in the old days you had your hand-me-downs that you darned.
Because I'm such a fashionista.
You're right. The idea that you think old is 4 seasons, and that's actually relatively new as a concept. But exactly, the amount that we are allowed to damage, again, people, planet, it's just unbelievable. So ideally, and this is where B Corporation comes in again, and you guys will see we're obviously huge proponents of B Corporation, because it puts in your article of incorporation right at that fundamental level that you have a responsibility to all stakeholders. So you need to take these things into account, and it really does kind of bring in that do no harm rule, or law, that would be phenomenal if every corporation had.
And it's interesting because B corporations, the focus is on the company, and the company is the actor to do these things. We had a great conversation this week with Rick Thomas, who's a good friend of ours, about the role of regulation and intervention. So we have a system, and then there's a role for intervention and regulation, which if you're a classically trained economics student, you would say, we need government really small, really small. We need to get government out of the way so the market can do its thing. And in this day and age, as we are racing off the cliff, you can now see the role of the regulatory frameworks that can put the guardrails,
governance.
Put the guardrails on, because left unfettered, we're now seeing the results of what happens. You know, the difference between the wealthiest and the least wealthy is historically massive. It's extraordinary. And so there is a role for regulation. You see in the EU, they're bringing in circular economy waste directives. There has to be. Otherwise, we see what the result is. If there's no rules, everyone runs rampant.
What I loved about what Rick said actually was that I feel like, as we've been talking about this for a number of years now, I've used language like, business is broken, and that business as
Kim
usual.
Kim got fired up as a Canadian, like, rah!
But it's so much. Anyway, but that what Rick said, which was much more precise, was it's not business that's broken, it's governance that's broken. And governance needs to come in and play a large role. And that, I thought, was a really beautiful distinction, because it's also something where if I say business is broken, it really gets more traditional business folks up in arms, right? So you kind of come at it from a very confrontational standpoint, where agreeing that there's all kinds of positives around free market and business and capitalism and all of those things is a nice place to start. And then you start to just say, well, can we agree on adding some regulations around that? So that was really our kind of the three areas that we saw that business needed a little bit of a rethink, or governance needed to come in, was business is rewarded for growth, business is, even if it's never ending and unrealistic, which means it needs to be manufactured. Business should have some type of, Hippocratic Oath is the wrong word, but some type of, do no harm rules around them, laws around them. And of course, that the fact that business is currently rewarded simply for a single bottom line profit, as opposed to triple bottom line people, planet, profit. So as we create new businesses, and there's people out there looking at doing startups or bringing more circular thinking into your business, you can't just add it as a pillar. You have to really fundamentally go in and shift how you're structured, how you're rewarded, and how does that work within your own company in the broader context of the world. So,
it's simple, it's easy, and that really wraps up our Valentine's Day Super Bowl week of 3 things you can do to save the planet. No pressure. We'll check in with you all on Monday and see how you're going. If you want to leave any comments about what we're batting on about, please do so. We've had great interactions with folks as we've started our series. So have a lovely weekend, and we'll see you next week.